I want you to take a second and just look at the person next to you. If you're at home, maybe look in the mirror. Now, ask yourself, what is the price of your peace? For some people, it's a quiet house. For others, it's a healthy bank account. But for a man like me, a black man who spent 25 years grinding in the tech industry to build a legacy from nothing, peace is often the most expensive thing I can buy. And yet, it's the one thing I can never seem to own. Have you ever felt like a stranger in a seat you paid 5 figures for? Like you're a guest in a room where your name is literally on the lease. I need you to tell me where you're watching this from in the comments. I want to know who is listening. Because today, I'm not talking as a CEO. I'm not talking as a businessman. I'm talking as a father who had to watch the light go out of his daughter's eyes at 35. 0 feet. If this story hits home for you, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and stick around. We need to talk about what's happening in this country, and we need to do it now. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. My daughter, Maya, had just turned 9 years old. That's such a beautiful age. Isn't it? They're still young enough to believe in magic, but old enough to start understanding the world. For months, all she talked about was seeing the volcanoes in Hawaii. She wanted to see where the earth was born. My wife, Alicia, and I had planned everything down to the minute. We didn't just want a vacation. We wanted a celebration. We'd survived a tough year, a year of mergers, late-night board meetings, and the kind of stress that turns your hair gray before your time. This was our "we made it" moment. I remember that morning so clearly. The sun wasn't even up in Atlanta yet. I was standing in front of the mirror, adjusting my watch, a gift Alicia gave me when our company hit its first 10 million in revenue. It's a heavy piece of gold, but it felt light that morning. I felt light. I walked into Maya's room, and she was already awake, sitting on her bed with her backpack on, clutching her favorite stuffed bear, Barnaby, ready to go. Peanut. I asked her. She gave me that smile, the one that makes every 80-hour work week worth it. "Daddy, do they have volcanoes on the plane?" I laughed, picking her up. "No, baby, but we're going to be sitting so high up, you'll be able to see the clouds like they're your own backyard." We took a private car to the airport. I know, some people might call that extra, but when you've spent your 20s taking the bus because you couldn't afford gas, you appreciate the quiet of a town car. We got to the terminal, and I felt that familiar rush of energy, but there was something else, too. A tiny knot in my stomach that I've carried since I was a teenager. It's the feeling of being watched. It doesn't matter if I'm wearing a 3-piece suit or a hoodie. When I walk into a high-end space, I can feel the eyes. They aren't looking at my success. They're looking for a reason. We checked in at the first-class counter. The agent was polite enough, but her eyes kept darting to my identification, then back to me. Then to Alicia. She didn't offer a welcome back or a happy birthday to Maya, even though it was flagged in our profile. She just handed over the tickets with a tight, professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Enjoy your flight," she said, her voice flat. Alicia squeezed my hand. She felt it, too. Alicia is the backbone of our family. She's seen me through the days when we were eating ramen in a studio apartment. She knows my CEO face, the one I put on to negotiate million-dollar deals, and she knows when I'm trying to hide my frustration. "Don't let it start now. Marcus," she whispered as we walked toward the lounge. "Today is for Maya." I took a deep breath. "You're right. Today is for her." We boarded the plane early. There's something about the smell of a first-class cabin, that mix of expensive leather, fresh coffee, and a hint of something sterile but luxurious. We had the first row. 1A, 1 billion, and 1C. I wanted Maya to have the window so she could see every inch of the Atlantic as we crossed over. I settled into 1A. Alicia was in 1B, and Maya was in 1C. As we were getting settled, the cabin started to fill up. That's when I noticed him. The man in 2B. He was an older guy, probably in his late 60s, wearing a golf shirt and a look of permanent annoyance. He boarded, looked at the seat numbers, and then looked at us. He didn't just look, he stared. It was that slow, head-to-toe scan that says, "Are you sure you're in the right place?" I gave him a nod, a polite, "Good morning, sir." He didn't nod back. He just turned to the flight attendant, a woman named Sarah, and whispered something. Sarah looked over at us, her expression shifting from a practiced customer service mask to something more guarded. She walked over to our row. "Excuse me, sir," she said, looking at me. "May I see your boarding passes again?" I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. "I just showed them to the agent at the door," I said, kept my voice low and steady. I didn't want Maya to hear the edge in my tone. "I just need to verify the seating for the manifest," she insisted. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the 3 tickets. I held them out. She took them, studied them for a good 10 seconds, much longer than it takes to read a seat number, and then handed them back. She didn't apologize for the interruption. She just turned and moved to the man in 2B. "Everything is fine, Mr. Henderson," she told him. She didn't ask to see his pass. Maya looked at me, her brow furrowed. "Is something wrong?" "Daddy, no. Peanut. Just a routine check," I said, forced a smile. I reached over and ruffled her hair. "Look out the window. I think they're starting the engines." I tried to put it out of my mind. I really did. I pulled out my tablet to review some reports, but I couldn't focus. I could hear 2B, Mr. Henderson, muttering. He was talking to the person next to him, complaining about how the quality of the service has gone down, and anyone can get in here these days. It's the these days that gets you. It's a code. We all know the code. 10 minutes later, I stood up to put my laptop bag in the overhead bin. I had kept it under the seat for the takeoff, but I wanted more legroom now that we were in the air. As I opened the bin above my seat, "Mr. Henderson stood up abruptly. "Hey, that's my space," he snapped. I looked at the bin. It was mostly empty, save for a small coat of his that was spread out across the entire section. "There's plenty of room here, sir. I'm just tucking this in the corner," I said. "That's my space," he repeated, louder this time. His face was starting to turn a shade of red that matched his anger. "You people always think you can just take whatever you want. Put that bag somewhere else." The cabin went silent. You know that kind of silence. The kind where you can hear the hum of the engines and the heartbeat in your own ears. That was it. "Sir," I said, my voice dropping an octave, the voice I use when a board member tries to overstep. "I am sitting in seat 1A. This is the bin for 1A. My bag is going here. I'm not going to have my expensive jacket crushed by your luggage," he stammered, his eyes darting around the cabin as if looking for an audience. Sarah, come here." The flight attendant, Sarah, came running back. She didn't even look at the bin. She looked straight at me. "Is there a problem here?" she asked. "He's being aggressive," Henderson said, pointing a finger at me. "He's trying to shove his bag on top of my things, and he's being very threatening about it." I felt the blood start to boil, but I forced it down. I thought about Maya. I thought about the video I'd seen 100 times of men who looked like me getting dragged off planes for non-compliance. I am not being aggressive, I said, keeping my hands visible and flat on the edge of the seat. I am simply trying to use the overhead storage that belongs to my seat. This gentleman is escalating a situation that doesn't exist. Sarah looked at Henderson, then at me. Her face hardened. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to keep your voice down. You're disturbing the other passengers. My voice is at a normal volume, I said. He is the one shouting. I don't like your tone, she said, leaning in closer. Her voice was a sharp whisper now, the kind that feels like a slap. We have rules on this aircraft. If you can't follow them, we will find a way to make you follow them. I looked at Alicia. Her face was pale. She was holding Maya's hand so tight her knuckles were white. Maya wasn't looking out the window anymore. She was looking at Sarah, then at the man in 2B, her eyes filling with a confusion that was rapidly turning into fear. I'm going to put my bag under my seat, I said, because at that moment, my pride wasn't worth my daughter's tears. I reached up to grab my bag, but as I did, my sleeve caught on the edge of the bin. It made a sharp, plastic snapping sound. Henderson jumped back as if I'd swung at him. See, he's breaking things. He's out of control. Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed the handset for the intercom, but she didn't speak into it. She kept her eyes locked on mine, her finger hovering over the call button for the cockpit. The mask of the friendly flight attendant was gone. In its place was something cold, something that didn't see a CEO, or a father, or a passenger. It saw a problem that needed to be erased. She stepped into my personal space, so close I could smell the peppermint on her breath. And she didn't look at the bag. She looked at my daughter, then back to me, and said in a voice that was barely audible over the engines, "Maybe you should have stayed where you belong." I felt a chill go down my spine that had nothing to do with the plane's air conditioning. It was the realization that this wasn't about a bag. It was never about the bag. I sat back down, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked down at my hands, the hands that had built a company, the hands that had held my daughter the day she was born, and they were shaking. I reached out to take Maya's hand, but she pulled back slightly, her eyes wide, searching my face for the man she thought I was, the man who could protect her from anything. I tried to speak, to tell her it was okay, but the words felt like lead in my throat. I just sat there, staring at the back of the seat in front of me, while the man in 2B settled back into his chair with a smug, satisfied huff, and Sarah walked away with a stride that felt like a victory lap. The silence in our row was no longer quiet. It was heavy. It was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I looked at the fastened seatbelt sign glowing above us, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a high-flying executive on his way to paradise. I felt like a prisoner in first class, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then, the intercom crackled to life. It wasn't the captain giving us a weather update. It was the sound of a voice that sounded far too formal, far too cold. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the lead purser. We are experiencing a minor cabin disturbance. We ask that all passengers remain in their seats with their seatbelts fastened. Security personnel, please prepare for arrival at the gate." I looked out the window. We weren't descending. We were still high above the clouds, but the plane was banking. We were turning around. My wife looked at me, her eyes filled with a terror I had never seen before. "Marcus," she whispered. "What did they do?" I didn't have an answer. I just watched as Sarah walked back toward our row, this time accompanied by a second flight attendant, their faces set in stone, their eyes fixed directly on seat 1A. I felt Maya's small, trembling hand finally find mine, and she squeezed it with a strength that broke my heart. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Are we the disturbance?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just gripped her hand back, watching as the shadow of the flight attendant fell over us, blocking out the sun that was supposed to be our gateway to Hawaii. Sarah reached up, her hand moving slowly, and pressed the call button right above my head, the chime echoing through the silent cabin like a funeral bell. She leaned down, her face inches from mine, and the look in her eyes told me that the walk of shame was about to begin. The chime of that call button didn't just ring, it vibrated through the marrow of my bones, a high-pitched frequency that signaled the end of my daughter's birthday and the beginning of a nightmare I'd spent my whole life trying to outrun. Sarah didn't move. She stood there, a sentinel of misplaced authority. Her eyes locked onto mine with a coldness that suggested she wasn't just doing her job. She was enjoying the correction. Behind her, the lead purser appeared, a tall, gaunt man with a face like crumpled parchment, who didn't look at me, but at the empty space just above my head. "Sir, we need you to step into the galley with us," the purser said. His voice was that specific kind of corporate calm, the kind that's designed to de-escalate a situation while simultaneously stripping you of your humanity. I looked at Alicia. Her eyes were darting between the purser and Sarah, her breath hitching in that way it does right before a panic attack. She knew what this was. We both did. And Maya was staring at my hand, the one that was still gripped tight around hers. I realized I was squeezing too hard. I loosened my grip. But I didn't let go. I couldn't. If I let go, it felt like the floor of this multi-million-dollar aircraft would just open up and swallow us whole. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me why I'm being addressed this way," I said. My voice was steady, but it was heavy. It was the voice I used in the boardroom when a competitor tried to lowball a buyout. It was a voice built on years of learning how to stand my ground without raising a finger. "You've been identified as a disruption to the safety and comfort of this cabin," the purser replied, his tone never wavering. "Mr. Henderson in 2B has expressed concern for his physical safety, and our crew has witnessed your uncooperative behavior regarding the safety regulations of the overhead bins." I felt a hollow laugh bubble up in my chest, but I choked it down. Uncooperative. I was trying to put my bag in the space I paid for. Mr. Henderson was the one shouting. He was the one making threats. Have you even asked him for his side? Or did you just take his word as gospel the moment he opened his mouth? The purser finally looked at me. It wasn't a look of understanding. It was a look of appraisal. He was looking at my tailored shirt, my watch, the wedding ring on Alicia's finger, and he was trying to reconcile those markers of success with the threat he had been told I was. But the bias was already baked in. The narrative was written before we even left the tarmac in Atlanta. "We aren't here to debate, sir," he said. "We are here to ensure a safe flight, right now. The captain has been informed of a level 1 security threat in the first-class cabin. We have made the decision to return to the gate to resolve this matter." Maya's voice was a tiny, broken thread in the silence. "Daddy, are we going home? What about the volcanoes?" That was the moment the BlackCEO tax hit its highest interest rate. For those of you who don't know what that is, let me explain. It's the invisible surcharge we pay for every bit of success we achieve. It's the requirement to remain perfectly calm, perfectly articulate, and perfectly submissive, even when you are being insulted. Because the moment you show a flash of justified anger, you aren't a man protecting his family anymore. You're a threat. You're aggressive. You're the reason they need security. I looked at Henderson in 2B. He was sitting back, his arms crossed over his chest, a faint, smug curve to his lips. He was watching the show. He had started the fire, and now he was warming his hands by the flames of my humiliation. He didn't have to say a word. He had the system on his side. I have the right to speak to the captain, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that felt like thunder. I am a Diamond Medallion member. I am a shareholder in this airline's parent company. I am not a security threat. I'm a father trying to take his daughter on a birthday trip. The captain is busy flying the plane. Sir, Sarah snapped. She was still standing right there, her hands on her hips, her badge glinting in the cabin lights. And your status doesn't give you the right to intimidate the crew. Who am I intimidating? Sarah, I asked, looking her dead in the eye. Is it my daughter? Is it my wife? Because they're the only ones who seem scared right now. The tension in the cabin was thick enough to choke on. Other passengers were starting to lean out into the aisle. I saw the glow of smartphones. People weren't just watching, they were recording. I knew what those videos would look like. They wouldn't show the 20 minutes of Henderson's baiting. They wouldn't show Sarah's dismissive sneers. They would show a large black man in first class arguing with a flight attendant while the plane turned around. They would show the disruption. Marcus, please, Alicia whispered. She was trembling now. Let's just see what they want. Let's not make it worse. It couldn't get much worse, Alicia, I said. But I stood up. I had to, if I stayed in that seat. They would call it refusing a lawful order. If I fought, I was a criminal. If I stayed silent, I was a victim. There were no winning moves on this chessboard. As I stood, the cockpit door opened. The captain stepped out. He was an older man, silver-haired, with the kind of reliable pilot face you see in commercials. He looked at the purser, then at Sarah, and then his eyes drifted over me to Mr. Henderson. Is this the individual? The captain asked, gesturing toward me without actually meeting my gaze. Yes, Captain, Sarah said immediately. He's been hostile since boarding. Refused to follow instructions regarding his carry-on, and has been verbally abusive toward Mr. Henderson and myself. I felt the air leave my lungs. Hostile. Verbally abusive. Captain, I have been sitting here trying to de-escalate this since we pushed back. Ask anyone in this row. Ask my wife. The captain didn't ask my wife. He didn't ask the passenger in 1D. He walked over to 2B and leaned down to speak to Henderson. Mr. Henderson, I apologize for the discomfort. Are you okay to continue the flight if we remove the source of the conflict? Henderson sighed, the sound of a man who had been deeply wronged. I just want a peaceful flight. Captain, I didn't pay for first class to feel like I'm in a bar fight. It's been very distressing. Understood, the captain said. He turned back to the purser. We're 5 minutes from the gate. Have the Port Authority waiting. I want them off the aircraft immediately. We have a schedule to keep. The finality of it was like a physical blow. It wasn't a discussion. It wasn't an investigation. It was an execution of my dignity. Captain, I said, stepping forward just an inch. The purser immediately moved to block me. You are making a mistake. A massive, legal, and moral mistake. You are taking the word of a man who has been racially profiling my family since we stepped into the lounge. The captain didn't even stop. He headed back toward the cockpit, his hand already on the door handle. I have a responsibility to the safety of my crew and my passengers. Sir, you've crossed the line. We'll handle the rest on the ground. The door clicked shut. The authority had spoken. I turned back to my seat. Alicia had her face in her hands. Maya was quiet, too quiet. She was staring at her birthday bear, her small fingers twisting the fur into knots. The joy that had been radiating off her all morning had been completely extinguished, replaced by a dull, heavy confusion. "Pack your things, baby," I said to Alicia. My voice felt like it was coming from somewhere far away. "We're really getting kicked off?" she asked, her voice cracking. "For what?" "Marcus. We didn't do anything." "I know," I said. "I know." We started gathering our things. It's funny the things you notice in a moment like that. The half-empty glass of orange juice Maya had been sipping. The way the light caught the gold leaf on the first-class menus. The silence of the other passengers. That complicit, heavy silence that always accompanies an injustice. Nobody spoke up. Nobody said, "Wait, that's not what happened." They just watched the disruption being removed. I grabbed our bags from the overhead bin, the same bin that had started this whole thing. I did it slowly, deliberately, making sure my movements were small and non-threatening. Every eye in that cabin was a camera. Every whisper was a verdict. "Come on, Maya," I said, reaching for her hand. She stood up, her backpack lopsided on her shoulders. She looked so small in that big first-class seat. She looked like a child who had just found out the world wasn't what she thought it was. "Are we in trouble?" "Daddy," she whispered. I looked at her, and I felt a rage so pure it nearly blinded me. But I couldn't show it. I couldn't give them the satisfaction of the angry black man narrative they were so desperately trying to write. "No, Peanut," I said, my voice thick. "We aren't in trouble. The world is just having a hard time being kind today. But we're going to be okay. I promise." We began the walk of shame. It's only 30 feet from the front of the plane to the door, but it felt like 300 miles. We had to pass every single person in first class. I saw the pity in some eyes, the judgment in others, and the absolute indifference in most. Henderson didn't even look up as we passed. He was already back to scrolling on his phone. The problem successfully dealt with. As we reached the galley, the plane gave a slight lurch. We were docked. The jet bridge was being attached. Sarah stood by the door, her professional smile back in place, though it looked more like a sneer when she looked at me. "Have a nice day," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a response. I didn't even look at her. I kept my eyes on the back of Alicia's head, and my hand firmly on Maya's shoulder. The door opened with a hiss of pressurized air. The cool, stale air of the terminal rushed in, smelling of jet fuel and floor wax. Standing right there, at the threshold of the plane, were 3 men in dark uniforms. Port authority. They weren't smiling. They had their hands on their belts, their faces set in that grim, tactical mask that always precedes a confrontation. One of them stepped forward, his eyes scanning us, pausing on my height, my shoulders, then moving to Alicia and Maya. "Marcus Vance," he asked. "That's me," I said. "We're going to need you to step this way." "Sir," he said, gesturing toward the jet bridge. "Leave the bags for now. Keep your hands where we can see them." I felt Alicia's breath hitch again. I felt Maya's hand tighten on my jacket. Behind us, I heard the sound of the first-class passengers beginning to move, their hushed conversations filling the space we had just vacated. The life we had been living 10 minutes ago, the life of luxury, of celebration, of being someone, was gone. I stepped out of the plane and onto the jet bridge. The floor felt unstable, like I was walking on water. I could hear the echoes of our footsteps on the metal, a hollow, rhythmic sound that felt like a countdown. We walked about 20 feet down the bridge before they stopped us. They didn't take us to the terminal. They pulled us off to the side, into that small, cramped space where the jet bridge meets the building. Face the wall. Sir, the lead officer said. Is this really necessary? I asked. I have a 9-year-old child here. We haven't committed a crime. The captain reported a level 1 disturbance and a refusal to follow crew instructions, the officer said, his voice hard. We'll decide what's necessary. Hands on the wall. I looked at Maya. She was standing next to her mother, her eyes wide, her lower lip trembling. She was watching her father, the man who told her she could be anything, the man who built a world for her, being treated like a common criminal in a hallway. I turned around. I put my hands against the cold, industrial metal of the wall. I could feel the vibration of the airport through the wall. I could hear the muffled announcements from the gates, the sound of people rushing to catch their flights, the sound of a world that was moving on without us. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to find that center, that CEO calm that had served me so well for 2 decades. But it wasn't there. There was only the heat of the metal under my palms and the crushing weight of the silence behind me. Search him, the officer said. I felt the heavy, gloved hands hit my shoulders, then move down my arms. Every pat, every shove, felt like a deliberate attempt to break something inside me that couldn't be mended. I thought about the board meetings. I thought about the charity galas. I thought about the time I was invited to the White House to discuss tech innovation. None of it mattered here. Here, I was just a body, a disturbance, a man who had dared to think he belonged in row 1. I heard the officer's radio crackle. We have the subjects in custody at gate B12. Proceeding with the secondary screening. Daddy. Maya's voice was so small I almost didn't hear it. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I'm right here. Maya. Just stay with Mommy. Why are they touching you like that? She asked. There was a new tone in her voice now. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was a sharp, piercing realization. It was the sound of a childhood ending. The officer's hands moved to my waist, checking my belt, my pockets. He pulled out my wallet, my phone, and that heavy gold watch. He laid them on a small ledge nearby, as if they were evidence in a murder trial. Sir, we're going to need to see some ID for everyone in your party, the officer said, stepping back but keeping his hand hovering near his holster. It's in the bag, I said, my face still inches from the wall. My wife has her purse. Alicia, give them the IDs, I said, my voice straining to stay level. I heard the rustle of her bag, the sound of her fumbling with the zippers. I could hear her crying now, not loud, just those small, ragged sobs that you try to hide when you don't want your kid to see you break. Here, she said, her voice shaking. Here's our passports, and Maya's birth certificate. We have everything. Please, just tell us what we did. The officers didn't answer. They just took the documents, their eyes moving back and forth between the papers and our faces. The silence stretched out, punctuated only by the distant roar of a jet engine taking off, perhaps the very plane we were supposed to be on, heading to the paradise we would never see. And then, I heard it, the sound of someone else walking down the jet bridge, heavy footsteps, confident, not the rhythmic march of the police, but something else. What's going on here? A new voice asked. I didn't recognize the voice, but it had an edge to it. I felt the officer who was searching me stiffen. His hand stopped moving. We're handling a cabin removal. Sir, the lead officer said, his tone shifting slightly. On whose authority? The new voice asked. It was closer now. I shifted my head just enough to see out of the corner of my eye. A man was standing there, wearing a navy blue blazer and an airport ID badge around his neck. He wasn't police. He looked like management. He was looking at the officers, then at the pile of my belongings on the ledge, then at Alicia and Maya. His eyes landed on me. He didn't look away. He looked at me with a kind of intense focus that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "You," he said, pointing a finger at me. "Are you Marcus Vance?" I didn't answer right away. I was still pinned against the wall, my dignity lying in a heap at my feet. I just stared at him, my chest heaving, the metallic taste of adrenaline and shame coating my tongue. The officer stepped in front of the man. "Sir, this is an active security matter. You need to step back." The man in the blazer didn't step back. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone, swiping through it quickly before holding it up for the officer to see. "I don't think you understand who you have against that wall," the man said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. I felt the officer's grip on my arm slacken. The air in the jet bridge seemed to change, the pressure shifting as the realization began to dawn on the men in uniforms that they might have just stepped into a minefield. I slowly pulled my hands away from the wall. I didn't wait for permission. I turned around, my back against the metal, my eyes fixed on the man in the blazer. I looked at Alicia, who was staring at the man like he was an angel from heaven. And then I looked at Maya. Maya wasn't looking at the man. She was looking at the lead officer's belt. She was looking at the handcuffs, the taser, the gun. She was looking at the tools of the world that had just tried to crush her father. And then, she did something I will never forget. She took a step forward, just one step. She moved away from her mother's side and stepped into the space between me and the officers. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't hide. She stood there, her small shoulders square, her chin tilted up, and she looked the lead officer right in the eye with a gaze that was older than 9 years, a gaze that carried the weight of 400 years of history. The officer blinked, taken aback by the sudden movement of this small child. He started to say something, to tell her to get back, but the words died in his throat. Maya didn't wait for him to speak. She reached out and touched the sleeve of my jacket, her fingers light as a feather, but her presence feeling like a shield of iron. The man in the blazer watched her, his expression unreadable, as the silence in that cramped hallway became something heavy, something historical, something that was about to break wide open. The silence that followed Maya's small hand touching my sleeve was different from the silence on the plane, on the aircraft. The silence was judgment, a heavy, suffocating blanket of people waiting for a show. But here, in this cold, metallic hallway between the sky and the ground, the silence was a vacuum. It was the sound of air being sucked out of a room right before an explosion. I looked down at her, and my heart didn't just ache. It felt like it was being physically wrung out like a wet cloth. Have you ever had to look your child in the eye and realize that the magic trick you've been performing for them, the one where you convince them the world is fair, has finally failed? That's what I saw in her. She wasn't looking at me for protection anymore. She was standing there as my protection. At 9 years old, she had sensed that my title, my money, and my 3-piece suit were no longer the armor I thought they were. She saw me as a target, and her instinct was to shield me. The lead officer, a man whose name tag read Miller, didn't move. His hand was still hovering near his hip, near the tools of his trade. He looked at Maya, then at me, then back at the man in the navy blazer who had just walked into this mess. "Sir, I told you to step back," Miller said, his voice tightening. "This is an active investigation into a cabin disturbance. We have a pilot's report of a level 1 threat. And I'm telling you," the man in the blazer said, stepping even closer, "that you are currently detaining the man who wrote the code for the very tablet you're using to look up his ID. My name is David Collins. I'm the ground operations manager for this terminal. And I suggest you take your hands off Mr. Vance before this becomes a national headline." The shift in the room was almost invisible, but I felt it. It was like the air pressure changing during a descent. Officer Miller's eyes flickered. He looked at my ID again, then at the phone David was holding. He didn't let go of my arm immediately. He didn't want to lose face. But the grip changed from restraint to uncertainty. "Daddy." Maya's voice broke the spell. It was clear, high, and carried that terrifying logic that only a child possesses. Miller looked down at her. He didn't have a choice. "What is it? Kid? Did my daddy break the law?" she asked. I was sitting right next to him. He was just trying to put his bag away from my birthday trip. Did he break a rule about the law? Or did he just break the rules of how we're supposed to look when we sit in the front of the plane? If I could have turned into dust and blown away in that moment, I would have. To hear my daughter articulate the reality of racial profiling at 9 years old, it was a loss of innocence more profound than any walk of shame. She wasn't asking about the overhead bin. She was asking about the skin we live in. She was asking why the rules were different for her father than they were for the man in 2B. Alicia let out a choked sob behind me. She reached out and pulled Maya back toward her. But Maya didn't move. She stayed right there, a tiny, fierce line in the sand. "I'm just following protocol." "Little girl," Miller stammered. He looked at me, and for the first time, he saw a human being, not a subject, not a disturbance, but a man with a family. The report said the report was a lie. David Collins interrupted. He was standing right next to us now. He looked at me with a mixture of recognition and deep embarrassment. "Mr. Vance, I am so incredibly sorry. I was just notified by corporate that you were on this tail number. We've been trying to get a meeting with your firm for 6 months to discuss the new logistics rollout. I never imagined. I never thought I'd find you like this. I finally found my voice. It felt like I was swallowing glass. You found me against a wall. David, you found me being searched in front of my daughter on her birthday because I dared to argue about an overhead bin with a man who didn't think I belonged in my seat." David looked at the officers. "Release him. Now. And get the captain down here. I want an explanation for why a diamond medallion passenger and his family were treated like a security threat based on a cabin dispute." Miller stepped back. He cleared his throat and avoided my eyes. "We were just responding to the call. Sir, we'll clear the area." They didn't apologize. Not really. They just faded back into the shadows of the hallway, their radios crackling with new, less complicated problems. But the damage wasn't with them. They were just the end of the fuse. The fire was still burning back on that plane. I stood there for a moment, rubbing my wrists where the officer's grip had been. I felt smaller than I've ever felt in my life. Despite the fact that I was now the most powerful person in the room. This is the thing about being a black CEO in America. You can have all the seat at the table you want. But you're still just one uncomfortable white passenger away from being back against the wall. "Mr. Vance," David said, his voice soft now. "We've pulled your bags. We have a private lounge waiting for you. We're gonna make this right. We'll get you on a private charter if we have to. Whatever you need." I looked at Alicia. She was still shaking. Then I looked at Maya. She was looking at the plane's door, which was still open just a few yards away. The first-class passengers were probably enjoying their pre-flight drinks now, thinking the problem had been solved. Sarah, The flight attendant was probably smiling at Mr. Henderson, thanking him for his patience. I don't want to lounge. David, I said. My voice was getting stronger now. The CEO coming back online. But it was fueled by a different kind of energy. And I don't want a charter. Whatever you want. Sir, David said. Just name it. I want to go back on that plane. I said. Alicia gasped. Marcus. No. Let's just go. Let's just go home. I can't go back in there. We have to. Alicia, I said. Turning to her, I took her hands in mine. They were ice cold. If we walk away now, what does Maya learn? She learns that when someone tries to erase you, you let them. She learns that if you're successful enough, you can buy your way out of a humiliation, but you can't stand up to it. We paid for those seats. We belong in those seats. And I'm not leaving this airport until that cabin sees that we aren't the ones who should be ashamed. I looked at Maya. Are you ready to go back? Peanut. She looked at the dark tunnel of the jet bridge. She looked at the officers who were still lingering near the exit. Then she looked at me. She didn't smile, but she nodded. The courage in that 9-year-old girl. It was enough to power a city. David, I said, turning back to the manager, I want you to walk us back on. I want the captain to meet us at the door, and I want the passenger in 2B to understand exactly whose plane he's sitting on. David didn't hesitate. He knew the legal nightmare he was staring at. He knew that one phone call from me could end his airline's contract with my company, a contract worth tens of millions. But more than that, I think he was just a man who realized he'd witnessed something ugly, and he wanted to be on the right side of history for once. Follow me, David said. We turned around. We walked back down that metal hallway. It felt different this time. The rhythmic echo of our footsteps didn't sound like a countdown anymore. It sounded like a march. We reached the threshold of the aircraft. The door was still open. Sarah was standing there, chatting with the lead purser when she saw us coming back. Her face went through a physical transformation. First, it was confusion. Then, it was annoyance. And then, as she saw David Collins and his corporate ID badge walking in front of us, it became pure, unadulterated fear. Is there a problem? Mr. Collins, she asked, her voice several octaves higher than it had been when she was whispering threats in my ear. There's a massive problem. Sarah, David said, his voice echoing through the cabin. And you're at the center of it. Where is the captain? He's in the cockpit, preparing for departure, she stammered. Get him, David ordered. The first-class cabin went silent again. Mr. Henderson leaned out of his seat, his face twisting into a scowl when he saw us. What is this, I thought we were done with this disturbance. Captain. They're back. The captain emerged from the cockpit, looking frustrated. What's the delay? Collins, why are they back on my aircraft? Because you made an illegal removal based on a biased report. Captain, David said, standing his ground. This is Marcus Vance. He is a primary stakeholder in our logistical operations. He is the reason this airline is able to fly half its routes on time. And you just put him against a wall in the jet bridge because of a dispute over a bag. The captain's face went from red to white so fast, it was like a camera flash. He looked at me, then at David, then at Sarah. The hierarchy of power had just inverted. I was told there was a physical threat, the captain said, his voice losing its command edge. The only threat here is the one you created to this family's dignity, I said, stepping forward. I wasn't shouting. I didn't need to. Captain, My daughter is 9 years old today. This was her birthday present. You allowed your crew to profile us. You allowed a passenger to harass us. And then you used the police to intimidate us. Now, I'm going to sit down in seat 1A, and you're going to decide how the rest of this flight goes. I walked past them. I didn't wait for a response. I walked right to seat 1A and sat down. Alicia sat in 1B. Maya sat in 1C. The silence in the cabin was so thick, you could have carved it. Every passenger was staring. Mr. Henderson in second base looked like he was about to have a stroke. He opened his mouth to speak, his face purple with rage. "This is outrageous," Henderson shouted. "I demand to be moved. I am not sitting behind Mr. Henderson," David Collins said, leaning over the man's seat. "If you have a problem with the seating arrangements, you are more than welcome to deplane. We have plenty of security on the jet bridge who would be happy to assist you." "But Mr. Vance and his family are staying." Henderson looked out the window, then at the jet bridge, then back at us. He realized he had lost. The system he had relied on to protect his prejudice had just turned its back on him. He slumped back into his seat, muttering something about calling his lawyer, but he was quiet. Sarah, the flight attendant, was standing in the galley, her hands shaking. She wouldn't look at us. She was staring at the floor, probably realizing that her career was unraveling in real time. But I wasn't looking at her. I was looking at Maya. She was sitting in her seat, clutching her birthday bear. She looked at me, and for the first time since we'd boarded, she gave me a tiny, tentative smile. It wasn't the big, bright smile from the morning. It was different. It was the smile of someone who had seen the world's teeth and realized she was still standing. "Are we going to see the volcanoes now, Daddy?" she whispered. "Yes, baby," I said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "We're going to see the volcanoes." But as the plane began to push back for the second time, and the safety video started to play on the screens, I realized that the victory felt hollow. We were back in our seats. We were going to Hawaii, but I could still feel the cold metal of that wall against my palms. I could still see the way the officer had reached for his belt when my daughter stepped forward. I looked out the window as the terminal began to slide away. I saw the ground crews, the fuel trucks, the busy life of the airport. From up here, everything looked so orderly, so managed. But I knew better now. I knew how thin the ice was. I leaned back and closed my eyes, trying to find some peace in the hum of the engines. But my mind was already racing. This wasn't over with a seat in first class. This wasn't over with an apology from a manager. I was thinking about the data. I was thinking about the thousands of families who don't have a David Collins to walk them back onto the plane. I was thinking about the fact that my daughter's 9th birthday would forever be defined by the moment she had to defend her father's right to exist in a space he had earned. The plane banked, turning toward the runway. The engines roared to life, pushing us back into our seats as we gathered speed. We were lifting off. The ground fell away. The airport shrinking into a toy set below us. We were rising above the clouds, heading toward the sun. I felt a touch on my arm. It was Alicia. She was looking at me, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. She knew what I was thinking. She knew that the BlackCEO wasn't just going on vacation anymore. He was going to war. I looked over at Maya. She was already asleep, her head resting against the window, her breath fogging the glass. She looked so peaceful, so innocent in her sleep, but I knew that when she woke up, she would be different. She would be a girl who knew that the sky wasn't just a place for clouds and volcanoes. It was a place where you had to fight for the right to fly. As the fastened seatbelt sign turned off with a familiar ding, I saw Sarah walking down the aisle with the beverage cart. She reached our row, her movements stiff and robotic. She stopped, looked at my glass, and then at me. Her hand was trembling so much that the ice in the pitcher was rattling like a warning. She didn't say a word, her eyes darting to the floor as she reached out to pour a drink she had refused us only an hour ago. I watched the liquid hit the bottom of the glass, the sound echoing in the quiet cabin, and I realized that the hardest part of the journey wasn't the flight itself. It was what we were going to have to carry with us when we landed. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold glass, and I felt the weight of the entire world sitting right there in my hand. The condensation on the glass Sarah had just filled felt like 1,000 tiny needles against my palm. The ice rattled as she pulled the cart away, the sound echoing like a confession in the pressurized silence of the cabin. I didn't drink. I just watched the bubbles rise and pop, much like the illusions I had held about my own arrival in this world. For years, I thought that if I built a tall enough mountain of success, the clouds of prejudice would stay beneath my feet. But sitting there in 1A, after being dragged into the jet bridge like a criminal, I realized that no matter how high I climbed, the air remained thin for men like me. I looked over at Alicia. She was leaning back, her eyes closed, but I could tell from the tension in her jaw that she wasn't sleeping. She was processing the same math I was, the cost of this victory. We were back in first class. Yes, we had the manager's apology. We had the wide-eyed, terrified compliance of a crew that realized they'd picked a fight with a man who could buy their career with a phone call. But the celebration was dead. You can't restart a birthday when the guest of honor has just seen her father pinned against a wall. About an hour into the flight, as we crossed over the California coastline toward the vast blue of the Pacific, the screen on my seat vibrated. It was a priority notification from the in-flight Wi-Fi system. A message from David Collins back at the gate. Marcus, the CEO of the airline, Robert Sterling, is on standby to speak with you via the satellite link. He has been briefed on the situation and is personally mortified. He would like to offer a formal apology and discuss how to make this right immediately. Whenever you are ready. I looked at the message for a long time. I knew Robert. We'd shared stages at tech conferences. We'd traded emails about supply chain optimization. He was a man who prided himself on inclusive corporate culture. And here he was, staring at a PR disaster and a legal nightmare, wrapped in the skin of a man he considered a peer. I reached for the handset, my fingers steady now. The CEO Marcus had fully taken over. The man who felt the shame in the jet bridge was still there, tucked away in a dark corner of my heart. But the man who ran $1 billion empire was the one who picked up the phone. "This is Marcus," I said, my voice as cold and flat as a sheet of ice. "Marcus. Good man. I don't even know what to say." Robert's voice was strained, coming through with that slight satellite delay that made everything feel even more detached. I just saw the preliminary report from Collins. I am absolutely sickened. My crew, the police, it's inexcusable. I've already authorized a full internal investigation. Sarah and the lead purser have been suspended effective the moment they land in Honolulu. We are pulling their logs, their training records, everything. "Robert," I interrupted, my voice quiet but cutting. "Don't tell me how sickened you are. My daughter is 9 today. She spent her birthday morning watching Port Authority officers check my waistband for a weapon because a passenger didn't like the way I looked at an overhead bin. Your crew didn't follow protocol. They followed their instincts. And their instincts told them that I was a threat, and that Mr. Henderson was a victim. That's not a training issue. That's a culture issue." There was a long silence on the other end. I could almost hear him shifting in his expensive leather chair in Chicago. "We want to make this right," Robert finally said. "Aside from the immediate disciplinary action, we're refunding your entire trip, including the hotels and the return flight. We're offering you a lifetime top-tier status for your entire family and a 5 million mile credit to your account. We want to show you that we value you, Marcus." I looked at Maya, who was still asleep, her small face bathed in the soft blue light of the cabin. 5 million miles, I asked, a bitter smile touching my lips. "Robert? You know, my net worth. You know, I can buy a fleet of these planes if I felt like it. Do you really think my daughter's dignity has a price tag in miles? Do you think my wife's tears can be washed away with a free flight to Paris? I know it's not enough," Robert said, his voice dropping. "What do you want? Then, tell me what will make this right." "I want a seat on your board," I said. The silence this time was even longer. It was the sound of a corporate giant realizing that the disruption wasn't going away with a voucher. "Marcus, that's a process. It's not something I can just, then don't call me again until the process has started," I said. "Because if I'm not in the room where the decisions are made, then Sarah and the next Sarah and the next Henderson will keep happening. You want to fix the culture, then put someone in the room who knows what it feels like to be pushed against your walls. Otherwise, Robert, expect my legal team to be the only ones you talk to from here on out." I hung up. I didn't wait for his rebuttal. I didn't need it. I felt a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't using my power to grow a bottom line. I was using it to claim a space that was never meant for me. I felt a hand on my shoulder. Alicia was awake. She had heard the whole thing. She didn't say anything, but she leaned over and kissed my cheek. Her eyes were still sad, but there was a flicker of pride there that hadn't been present an hour ago. "You okay?" she whispered. "I'm tired." "Alicia," I admitted. "I'm just so tired of having to be a stakeholder just to be treated like a person." "I know," she said, her voice a soft anchor. "But look at her." I looked back at Maya. She was stirring. She stretched her small arms, her birthday bear falling onto the floor. I picked it up, brushing off a stray piece of lint before tucking it back under her arm. She opened her eyes, blinking against the bright sunlight streaming through the window. "Are we there yet, Daddy?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "Not yet. Peanut. About 3 more hours." She sat up, looking around the cabin. Her eyes landed on Mr. Henderson in second base. He was pretending to read a newspaper, but I could see the paper shaking. He knew he was the ghost in the room. Maya didn't look at him with anger. She didn't look at him with fear. She looked at him with a kind of profound, quiet pity that only a child can muster. "Daddy," she said, turning back to me. "Yeah, baby. Back there, when the police were touching you," she started, her voice small. I was scared. I felt that familiar pang in my chest. "I know. Maya, I'm so sorry you had to see that." "No," she said, shaking her head. "I wasn't scared for you. I mean, I was..." But then I looked at their faces. The police and that lady in the uniform. "What do you mean?" "They looked so small," she said, her eyes wide and honest. "They were trying to make you look like a bad man, but they were the ones who looked like they were hiding. I was scared for them, Daddy, because they didn't know who you were. They thought they were the bosses, but they were just being mean because they didn't have anything else. I felt bad for them, that they have to live in their heads like that." I sat there, stunned. I had spent the last 2 hours thinking about board seats, legal strategies, and power dynamics. I had been planning my war, and here was my 9-year-old daughter, who had just distilled the entire pathology of prejudice into a single, devastating observation. She hadn't seen a victim and a villain. She had seen a man of substance being harassed by people of hollow authority. "Maya," I said, my voice cracking, "you are the smartest person I know." "I just want to see the volcanoes," she said, leaning her head on my shoulder. "I want to see the fire coming out of the ground. Because even if it's scary, it's how the islands get bigger. Right?" "That's exactly right," I said, holding her close. "The fire makes the world bigger." The rest of the flight passed in a blur of blue sky and white clouds. We didn't speak to the crew unless we had to. Sarah tried to offer Maya a special dessert, a chocolate lava cake with happy birthday written in raspberry sauce. But Maya just looked at it and said, "No, thank you. I'm not hungry for that." The rejection was polite, but it was final. Sarah looked like she wanted to cry, but I didn't have any pity left for her. My daughter had already used up the family's quota of empathy for the day. When we finally began our descent into Honolulu, the captain's voice came over the intercom. He sounded different, humbled, perhaps, or maybe just terrified of what awaited him at the gate. He gave us a long, detailed description of the weather and the sights we would see as we landed. It was the most attention he'd paid to the cabin the entire trip. As the wheels hit the tarmac with a gentle thump, I felt a weight lift, but it was replaced by a new kind of responsibility. I looked at the comments on my last post, people from all over the country sharing their own stories of being removed or profiled. I realized that my story wasn't just mine. It was a mirror for thousands of people who didn't have the CEO title to protect them. The doors opened, and for the second time that day, we walked off a plane, but this time, it was different. Waiting at the end of the jet bridge wasn't the police. It was a small delegation of airline executives in suits, their faces tight with anxiety. They stepped forward as I emerged, Maya's hand in mine. "Mr. Vance, we are so incredibly sorry," one of them began, reaching out for a handshake I didn't return. "We have a car waiting. We've arranged for a private escort through the terminal." "I don't need an escort," I said, walking past them. "I've already been escorted enough today." We walked through the Honolulu airport, the air smelling of salt and tropical flowers. People were rushing by, tourists in leis, families laughing, the world moving in its beautiful, chaotic rhythm. I stopped for a moment near a large window overlooking the runway. I could see the plane we had just left, the giant metal bird that had been our prison and our palace all in one day. I turned to look at the camera on my phone, the one I used to talk to all of you. "If you're still here, if you're still listening," I said, my voice steady as I recorded the final words of this story. "I want you to remember something. Your value is not determined by the row you sit in. It's not determined by the watch on your wrist or the balance in your bank account. Those things can be taken away in a second by a person with a badge and a bias. Your value is what you carry inside you when the world tries to push you against a wall." I looked at Maya, who was watching a butterfly that had somehow found its way into the terminal. I thought I was taking my daughter to see volcanoes to teach her about the world. I continued, "But today, she taught me that the fire inside us is stronger than the fire in the ground. If you've ever been made to feel like you don't belong, I want you to drop a comment below. Tell me your story. Let's make sure these unseen truths aren't unseen anymore. Don't forget to subscribe, because this is just the beginning of a much bigger conversation. We aren't just sitting in the back of the bus or the front of the plane anymore. We're changing the way the whole thing flies. I clicked end on the recording. Daddy, look. Maya pointed out the window. In the distance, past the runways and the palm trees, a thin plume of smoke was rising against the clear blue sky. A volcano. Not a destructive one, but a steady, persistent reminder of the Earth's power to reshape itself. I see it. Peanut, I said, picking her up and resting her on my hip. I see it. Alicia stepped up beside us, wrapping her arm around my waist. We stood there for a long moment, a family that had been broken down and rebuilt in the span of 6 hours. We weren't the same people who had left Atlanta. We were older, harder, but somehow more certain of who we were. As we walked toward the exit, toward the sun and the vacation that had finally, truly begun, I didn't look back at the airline reps. I didn't look back at the plane. I just looked forward. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just flying in first class. I was leading the way. Keep your head up. I'll see you in the next one.